For years, Danny Heinrich was just a quiet neighbor, someone you'd pass without a second thought. His neighbors are now struggling to understand how the unremarkable man they knew could be the predator police say was hiding in plain sight. One woman even insisted she would have noticed, that she watches for signs. But the chilling truth is, there were no obvious signs. Heinrich's disguise was normalcy itself. He kept to himself, maintained a low profile, and was utterly forgettable. He understood a basic human truth. People see what they expect to see. They look for the strange and unusual, but someone who perfectly mimics the ordinary becomes invisible. And for 15 years, invisibility was his perfect cover. Until now, the scene shifts to an interrogation room at the Minneapolis precinct. Gray walls, a metal table, and that familiar one-way mirror. Detective Silas Vance sits across from Danny Heinrich. After 15 long years of carrying this case, the man responsible is just 3 feet away, looking smaller and more ordinary than Silas had ever imagined. Heinrich is wearing the same clothes he was arrested in, jeans, a plain blue sweatshirt, worn-out sneakers. His face is a blank slate, no fear, no defiance, just an unsettling calm. It's like a routine job interview for a position he doesn't really want. Do you know why you're here, Danny? Silas begins. Heinrich's reply is low and controlled, without any emotion, just as witnesses had described years ago. You arrested me. I assume you'll tell me why. Silas lays it out. We have evidence connecting you to multiple assaults, young boys. Going back to 1983, he mentions the items found during the search of Heinrich's property and, crucially, the new DNA evidence. DNA technology has come a long way, Silas presses. We can match genetic material from crime scenes going back decades, every case you touched. We can connect you to all of it. It's a partial bluff. They don't have DNA from the most high-profile case, the abduction of Jacob Wetterling, but they have solid samples from other attacks. For a moment, a flicker of calculation crosses Heinrich's face. He's smart enough to know that technology has finally caught up to his crimes. He's quiet for a long moment, the gears turning in his head. The invisible man is starting to realize he's been seen. Then he utters the expected words, "I want to talk to a lawyer," but Silas sees the crack in his calm facade. The mask is beginning to slip. 4 hours later, Heinrich's public defender arrives. After a 90-minute private meeting, Heinrich's demeanor has shifted. The unnerving calm is still there, but now it's mixed with resignation. His lawyer has laid out the cold, hard facts. The DNA from one assault is a 99.7% match, a number that seals fates in a courtroom. Partial matches from other incidents create a devastating pattern. Then there's what they found in his home. Newspaper clippings about Jacob Wetterling's disappearance, maps marked with suspicious locations and buried in his backyard, a dark fabric mask with crude eye holes. The evidence is overwhelming. The lawyer leans forward. My client is willing to discuss a plea arrangement. Silas's heart pounds. This is the moment. What's he offering? Asks the prosecutor. Full cooperation. Complete disclosure of all incidents, the lawyer replies. In exchange, Heinrich wants consolidated charges and a specific sentence. He wants to control his own defeat. The prosecutor looks at Silas. 15 years of searching, of dead ends, of heartbreak for so many families. Do they take the deal or risk a trial? Silas's voice is steady, cutting through the tension in the room. Jacob Wetterling? Any deal includes full disclosure about Jacob Wetterling. After a brief, silent exchange with his client, Heinrich's lawyer gives the answer they've been waiting 15 years to hear. Yes, that's part of the offer. The confession was the final key. A chilling admission that brought a partial, painful closure to a case that had haunted a community for a generation. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more in-depth looks at true crime cases. The recovery took 2 days, every fragment documented, every piece of evidence cataloged. The remains were treated with dignity that felt desperately important, even though it was 15 years too late to matter. When it was finished, when Jacob was finally being transported to the medical examiner's office for formal identification, Silas sat in his truck with his head against the steering wheel and let himself feel the weight. He'd been carrying for 15 years. They'd found him. Not the way anyone wanted him. Not alive and traumatized, but recoverable. But found. And that meant they could stop searching. Stop wondering. Stop hoping for an outcome that had never been possible. The case that had defined Silas's career was finally truly over. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated in ways the public didn't fully understand. Heinrich's plea deal wasn't clean or simple. It couldn't be. There were multiple jurisdictions involved, multiple victims, multiple crimes spanning 15 years. The prosecution had to balance the needs of several families, the demands of different counties, and the practical realities of what they could prove in court. The deal that was ultimately struck gave Heinrich a 20-year federal sentence for child exploitation charges, not murder, not kidnapping. Technical charges related to other cases that could be proven definitively with the evidence they had. The public was outraged. 20 years for murdering a child? For destroying a family? For terrorizing an entire state for 15 years? But the prosecutors explained over and over that without the confession, they might not have gotten anything. The physical evidence linking Heinrich to Jacob's murder was circumstantial. His DNA wasn't at the crime scene because there's no biological evidence recovered. The mask found in his yard could have been explained away. The newspaper clippings could have been attributed to morbid interest. The confession was everything. And confessions come with prices. Heinrich's lawyer had negotiated from a position of surprising strength, despite the evidence against his client. Because Heinrich knew where Jacob was buried. Because he had information about other cases that had never been solved. Because he could give families closure or withhold it. It was a hostage negotiation disguised as a legal proceeding. The families of other victims had to be consulted. Some wanted trials, wanted Heinrich to face public judgment for every crime. Others wanted closure more than they wanted vengeance, wanted answers more than they wanted lengthy court battles. Kylie advocated for the plea deal. Not because she thought it was fair, nothing could be fair in this situation, but because it meant bringing Jacob home. It meant knowing for certain what happened. It meant not spending years in courtrooms reliving the trauma while defense attorneys picked apart every piece of evidence. The hearing where Heinrich officially entered his plea was scheduled for a Tuesday in April. The courtroom was packed. Media, family members, officers who'd worked the case, civilians who felt connected to Jacob's story. Heinrich sat at the defense table in a suit that hung loose on his frame. He looked smaller than he had during the interrogation, defeated, aging rapidly under the weight of exposure. But when he stood to address the court, to formally admit his guilt, his voice was still that same flat, emotionless tone. He read from a prepared statement, acknowledged his crimes, apologized in words that meant nothing because they carried no feeling. It was a performance. Legal theater required by the plea agreement. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. Heinrich wasn't sorry. He was caught. There's a difference. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later. Justice, such as it was moving forward. 20 years in federal prison. That was the sentence Heinrich received. He'd taken a child's life, destroyed a family, traumatized an entire state, and walked free for 15 years before facing any consequences. 20 years felt like nothing. But it was also everything they could get given the complexities of evidence and time and legal. Reality is that it didn't care about emotion or fairness. If you were the judge, what sentence would you give? Comment below, because this is where justice gets complicated. Where the legal system and moral outrage diverge into different paths that never quite meet. Some people argued Heinrich deserved life without parole. Or worse, that someone who preys on children, who murders an 11-year-old boy and buries him in the woods, forfeits any claim to mercy or measured punishment. Others pointed out that without the plea deal, Heinrich might never have told them where Jacob was buried. That families might still be wondering, still searching, still trapped in that awful limbo of not knowing. What's worth more harsh punishment or closure? The answer depends on who you ask. Heinrich had exploited every gap in 1980s law enforcement. The lack of coordination between jurisdictions, the absence of DNA databases, the limitations of technology, the fact that he looked normal enough that nobody looked twice. He'd understood the system's weaknesses and used them perfectly. His confession didn't come from remorse. It came from calculation. He knew the evidence would bury him. Knew the items found in his property would connect him to multiple crimes. Knew his only leverage was information, so he traded it. Gave families closure in exchange for a sentence he could potentially survive. He was 53 at sentencing. With good behavior, he'd be out in his 70s. Not young, but not dead either. He'd get to age, to breathe, to experience seasons changing in food and whatever small freedoms prison allowed. Jacob never got past 11. That asymmetry, that fundamental unfairness was what made the case feel incomplete even after it was solved. Justice had been served by the standards of the legal system. The perpetrator was caught, prosecuted, sentenced. But justice, in the deeper sense that meant balance and rightness, remained elusive. Some wounds don't heal just because you identify what caused them. Some victories feel hollow even when they're real. This was both. Jacob's death changed America. Not immediately, not in one dramatic moment. But gradually, systematically, the way tectonic plates shift and reshape continents over time. The Wetterling Act, passed in 1994, 4 years before Heinrich S. arrest, but driven entirely by Patty S. advocacy, became the foundation for how the United States tracks those who prey on children. Before Jacob, there was no national registry. If someone was convicted of a crime against a child in Minnesota, then moved to Wisconsin, there was no automatic notification. No flag in the system. No way for law enforcement in the new location to know they had a predator in their community. The gaps were enormous, dangerous, and Heinrich had exploited every single one of them. The Wetterling Act required states to create registries, required those convicted of crimes against children to register their addresses, required law enforcement to know who was living in their jurisdictions. It wasn't perfect. The first versions had loopholes and limitations, but it was a start. A framework that would be built upon and strengthened over the following decades. By 1998, when Heinrich was finally caught, the system had evolved. The databases existed. The communication channels between departments had been established. The kind of anonymity Heinrich had relied on was becoming impossible. If Jacob had been taken in 1998 instead of 1983, Heinrich would have been identified within days. His name would have flagged immediately because of the Painesville incidents. His pattern of behavior would have been tracked across jurisdictions. The technology that didn't exist in the 80s would have exposed him before he had a chance to disappear. But Jacob wasn't taken in 1998. He was taken in 1983, when the systems that might have saved him didn't exist yet. So his death became the catalyst for creating them. The Wetterling Act has since been expanded, strengthened, folded into other legislation. It merged with Megan's Law, creating public access to registry information. It evolved into the Adam Walsh Act, which established a national database and increased penalties for non-compliance. Millions of children have been protected by systems that exist because one 11-year-old boy was taken on a gravel road in Minnesota. Patty spent the rest of her life advocating for these changes. She testified before Congress. She met with legislators. She traveled the country speaking to law enforcement agencies about what worked and what didn't. She transformed her grief into a weapon against the kind of evil that took her son. And it worked. Not perfectly. Not completely. Predators still exist. Children are still victimized. But the system's designed to catch them before they hurt multiple victims, to track them across state lines, to prevent them from vanishing into anonymity. Those systems exist because of Jacob. His name became synonymous with child safety legislation. Not because of how he lived, but because of how he died. And because his mother refused to let that death be meaningless. The way America raised children changed after Jacob. stranger danger, became a phrase every kid knew before they learned to spell their own name. Schools implemented programs teaching children about safe adults versus unsafe adults, about saying no to inappropriate requests, about running and screaming if someone tried to grab them. Parents who grown up roaming neighborhoods freely until dark didn't give their own children that same freedom. Playdates became supervised. Walking to school became driving to school. The radius of independence shrank from blocks to yards. Some called it paranoia, overprotection, a generation of helicopter parents creating anxious children who couldn't navigate the world independently. Others called it necessary adaptation to a reality that Jacob's case had made impossible to ignore. The truth lived somewhere between those extremes. Minneapolis transformed physically. Streetlights were installed on roads that had been dark. Community watch programs formed in neighborhoods that had never felt the need before. Parks added security cameras. Schools revised their pickup procedures, requiring ID checks and sign-up sheets. The trust that had defined the community in 1983, the unlocked doors, the unsupervised play, the assumption that nothing bad could happen here was gone. Replaced by vigilance that became the new normal. But something else emerged too. A different kind of community strength. The park where Jacob used to play became a memorial site. Not immediately. It took years for the family to be ready for that. But eventually, a bench was installed with a plaque bearing his name and dates. Trees were planted. A small garden maintained by volunteers who never met Jacob but felt connected to his story. The trail where he was taken, that gravel road through the trees, became a place of reflection. People walked it on the anniversary of his disappearance, sometimes in organized groups, sometimes alone. Not to celebrate, but to remember. To acknowledge that this place held pain, but also purpose. Because remembering Jacob meant more than mourning him. It meant honoring what his death had created. The laws, the systems, the awareness that made other families safer. Minneapolis became both more cautious and more united. The fear that had fractured the community in the 80s, the suspicion, the witch hunts, the neighbors turning on neighbors, evolved into something more constructive. Shared purpose, collective protection. A community that understood its vulnerabilities and worked together to address them rather than tearing itself apart, looking for someone to blame. It wasn't the innocence of 1983. That could never be recovered. But it was something stronger, something that acknowledged darkness while refusing to be consumed by it. Jacob's legacy wasn't just in laws and registries. It was in how a community learned to protect its children while still letting them be children. Every October 22nd, something remarkable happens across Minnesota. As the sun sets, porch lights turn on, not just a few, thousands of them. From Minneapolis to St. Paul, spreading out into the rural counties across the entire state. The lights on for Jacob tradition started small. A handful of families in the neighborhood where he'd lived. A few dozen people who wanted to mark the anniversary in a way that felt meaningful rather than morbid. It grew organically. No official organization coordinated it. No campaign pushed it. People just started doing it, leaving their porch lights on all night. A simple gesture that said, "We remember. We're watching. We won't let darkness win." From above on the anniversary night, Minneapolis looks like a constellation. Thousands of small lights refusing to go out, creating a map of solidarity visible for miles. It's beautiful in a way that breaks your heart if you understand what it means. Those lights represent families who lock their doors now. Parents who drive their kids to school instead of letting them walk. Communities that lost their innocence and had to find new ways to feel safe. This case also represents resistance. A refusal to let fear become paralysis. A commitment to protecting children while honoring the one who couldn't be protected. Silas Vance, the lead detective, retired 6 months after Heinrich's sentencing. He'd stayed just long enough to see the case through, to testify, and to watch justice imperfect but real finally arrive. He had carried Jacob's file for half his career. 15 years of dead ends, false hopes, and grinding persistence that yielded nothing until it yielded everything. After the conviction, the file went to storage. Case closed. But Silas kept a copy of Jacob's school photo, the one that had been on his desk for 15 years. He framed it and hung it in his home office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder of the cost of gaps in our systems, of how predators exploit normalcy, and of why details, patterns, and never giving up truly matter. He would always be haunted by the fact that he failed to save Jacob, but he helped ensure Jacob's death meant something, that the systems created in response would save other children. Jacob's name outlived his death by decades and will outlive everyone who knew him. It's stamped on legislation, cited in court cases, and referenced in law enforcement training manuals. Children born years after 1983 grew up safer because of systems created in Jacob's name. They'll never know his face or his story, but they benefit from the protections his death made possible. That's the hardest kind of legacy to reconcile, one built on tragedy, one that shouldn't have been necessary but became essential. Jacob's mother, Patty, lived to see those systems work. She saw predators caught because registries flagged them and children found quickly because departments learned to communicate. Each success was validation that her son's death hadn't been meaningless. And each success was a reminder that he was still gone. She passed away years later, her advocacy work complete but never finished. Because the work of protecting children is never finished, there's always more to do. She transformed her worst nightmare into armor for other families, making Jacob's name a shield. Today, Minneapolis is unrecognizable from the city it was in 1983. Not just physically, with more cameras and supervised playgrounds, but in consciousness. People understand now what they didn't then. That evil doesn't announce itself, that predators look like everyone else, and that vigilance isn't paranoia. The gravel road where Jacob was taken is now paved and well lit. But every October 22nd, people stop. They walk that road with flashlights, standing in silence where 3 boys once rode bikes and only 2 made it home. And as darkness falls across the city and the state, thousands of porch lights flicker on a network of remembrance. A reminder that darkness exists, but it doesn't have to win. 4 lessons emerge from Jacob's story. First, evil hides in plain sight. Danny Heinrich wasn't a monster from a movie. He was aggressively, deliberately normal. This was his disguise. The lesson isn't to suspect everyone, but to be aware. To pay attention to patterns, not just obvious red flags. Second, systemic change can emerge from tragedy. Jacob's death was senseless, but it created the Wetterling Act, registry requirements, and awareness campaigns. His mother, Patty, could have disappeared into her pain. Instead, she weaponized it and forced change. How many children are alive today because she refused to let Jacob be the end of the story? We'll never know, but it's likely in the tens of thousands. Third, never underestimate the power of community. While the community fractured under the weight of not knowing, it also came together in powerful ways. They searched, they supported, and eventually they created a new kind of community built on awareness and a shared commitment to protection. And finally, the 4th lesson, technology and persistence, when combined, can solve the unsolvable. For years, the case was cold, but investigators never gave up. They preserved evidence, followed new leads, and when DNA technology finally caught up, they were ready. It's a testament to the idea that no case is ever truly hopeless. Science, combined with relentless human spirit, can bring answers even decades later. Jacob's name became a shield, and shields save lives. Thank you for watching and for remembering. If you found this story meaningful, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Volunteer searching for months. Porch lights staying on for decades. Memorial gardens maintained by people who never met Jacob. Laws championed by citizens who demanded better from their representatives. Communities are fragile, they can break. But they can also build, create, protect. The Lights On for Jacob tradition wasn't mandated by government or organized by institutions. It was ordinary people deciding that remembrance mattered, that solidarity mattered, that showing up even in a small way like leaving a light on mattered. Fourth, justice delayed isn't justice denied. 15 years. That's how long it took to catch Heinrich. 15 years of him walking free while investigators worked with inadequate tools and outdated systems. But he was caught, eventually. When science caught up to the crime and persistence met opportunity, the delay was painful, inexcusable in some ways. But the case was solved. The predator was stopped. Families got answers. Justice isn't always swift. Sometimes it takes decades for the right technology, the right investigator, the right tip to converge. That doesn't mean you give up. Silas Vance carried that file for half his career. Never stopped looking. Never stopped caring. And when the moment came, he was ready. Persistence matters, even when progress feels impossible. Even when hope fades. Because cold cases don't stay cold forever. Has your community experienced something similar? Not necessarily a child abduction, though tragically many communities have. But any case that changed how people lived, how they trusted, how they protected each other. Drop a comment and share your story. Because these aren't isolated incidents. They read part of a larger pattern of how communities respond to trauma and whether they let it destroy them or transform them. What would you have done if you were Detective Vance? Would you have carried that file for 15 years? Would you have kept Jacob's photo on your desk when everyone else had moved on? Would you have stayed obsessed with a case that seemed unsolvable while your career passed you by? Or would you have accepted the reality that some cases go cold and stayed cold? That you did your best, but it wasn't enough? There's no wrong answer. But the question matters because it reveals something about persistence, about what we're willing to sacrifice for justice that might never come. Every unsubscribed viewer is one more person unprepared for what's coming. Change that now. Because stories like Jacob's don't stop happening. Predators don't stop existing just because we're uncomfortable thinking about them. Communities don't stop facing tragedies that test whether they'll fracture or unite. The only defense is awareness. Understanding how these patterns work. Recognizing the signs. Knowing what to look for when everyone else sees nothing wrong. If you still won't subscribe, comment below and explain why awareness doesn't matter to you. Maybe you think this can't happen in your town, your neighborhood, your family. Danny Heinrich's neighbors thought the same thing. Right up until police cars surrounded his house and they learned the quiet man 3 doors down had been a monster all along. We're building a tribe of people who refuse to forget. Join us, not because we're obsessed with tragedy, but because we understand that remembering prevents repetition, that awareness saves lives, that communities prepared for darkness handle it better than communities pretending it doesn't exist. Jacob's story ended in tragedy, but his legacy? That's still being written. Every child protected by systems created in his name, every predator caught because databases flagged them, every family spared the nightmare his family lived through. That's the legacy. That's what matters. The gravel road is still there. The lights still go on. And Jacob's legacy? It saves lives every single day. But that's not where this story ends. Because for every case like Jacob's that gets solved, there are dozens still sitting in basement storage, files gathering dust. Families still waiting for answers that may never come. Next time, we're looking at a case that makes Heinrich look predictable. A predator who didn't just blend into one community, he moved between them, changed identities, stayed ahead of technology and law enforcement for twice as long as Heinrich did. And when he was finally caught, the method was so unexpected, so impossible to predict, that investigators are still teaching it in training academies today. You won't see it coming. Neither did the dozens of families he destroyed. Subscribe before the next predator catches you off guard. To everyone who watched this whole video, who engaged in the comments, who shared this story with someone who needed to hear it, thank you. You're part of why these stories matter. Why Jacob's name continues to protect children decades after his death. Keep the lights on. Keep remembering. Because the moment we forget is the moment we become vulnerable again. The moment we stop paying attention is the moment someone like Heinrich sees an opportunity. And we're not giving them that opportunity. Not anymore. Some monsters wear masks. Others wear ordinary faces.